Warning: the content on this channel often covers topics that are considered eerie or scary and can be triggering to some individuals. Viewer discretion is advised.
In the 1980s and early 1990s, America was gripped by a widespread moral panic, one that came to be known as Satanic Panic. Fear of satanic cults, ritualistic abuse, and the occult spread across communities, fueled by media coverage, misinformation, and mass hysteria. What started as isolated incidents quickly grew into a nationwide obsession, impacting music, games, toys, and even innocent people accused of horrific crimes. But how did this happen? And why were so many so quick to believe in these dark conspiracies? Satanic Panic is a textbook example of mass hysteria and groupthink, psychological phenomena where fear, suspicion, and paranoia spread rapidly through a community, leading to irrational and often destructive behavior. As we'll see, the roots of this panic go deep into the human psyche, and the results were as devastating as any witch hunt from centuries past. One of the most notorious incidents of the Satanic Panic era involved the McMartin Preschool in Manhattan Beach, California. It all began in 1983 when Judy Johnson, the mother of a young boy attending the preschool, accused a teacher, Raymond Bucky, of sexually abusing her child. Johnson's claims were not just limited to sexual abuse. She alleged that satanic rituals were being performed on the children. The accusations quickly spiraled out of control, implicating not only Bucky but also his mother, Peggy McMartin Bucky, the preschool's owner, along with several other staff members. As investigators interviewed more children, their claims grew more bizarre. Through suggestive and often coercive questioning techniques, children began to describe wild stories of underground tunnels, secret rooms where they witnessed satanic rituals, and even claims of flying. One child claimed that teachers could turn into witches and fly. These statements, despite being highly improbable and without any physical evidence, were accepted as fact during the investigation. For the owners of the McMartin Preschool, the accusations were devastating. Peggy McMartin Bucky and her son, Raymond Bucky, endured years of legal battles and public vilification. Despite the lack of physical evidence, the case went to trial, becoming one of the longest and most expensive criminal cases in U.S. history. Ultimately, no one from the McMartin Preschool was ever convicted of any crime, and the original allegations were proven baseless. But for the McMartin family, the damage had already been done. During the 1980s, Kern County, California, became one of the epicenters of the Satanic Panic, with numerous allegations of child abuse involving supposed satanic rituals. The case began when two children, under the influence of coercive questioning, accused their parents and several other adults of participating in satanic rituals and abuse. The accusations quickly spiraled, leading to the arrest and conviction of many innocent people, including daycare workers and community members. The key players in these cases were social workers and prosecutors who believed they were uncovering a vast satanic conspiracy. Prosecutor Ed Jagels played a significant role in securing convictions, while social workers used highly suggestive interviewing techniques to extract testimonies from children. The children, often subjected to repeated and leading questioning, began to describe bizarre and horrific scenarios that lacked any physical evidence. The outcome was tragic. Dozens of people were wrongfully convicted, with many spending years in prison before their convictions were overturned. The aftermath of the Kern County cases highlighted the flaws in the justice system, particularly the use of coerced testimony from children and the lack of corroborating evidence. Many of those wrongfully accused struggled to rebuild their lives, and the Kern County cases remain a stark example of the damage caused by mass hysteria and moral panic. In 1993, the brutal murders of three 8-year-old boys, Stevie Branch, Christopher Byers, and Michael Moore, in West Memphis, Arkansas, shocked the nation. In the wake of the killings, suspicion quickly fell on three local teenagers, Damian Eccles, Jason Baldwin, and Jesse Miskelly Jr., collectively known today as the West Memphis Three. Damian Eccles, the most high-profile of the three, was targeted largely because of his unconventional appearance and interests. He wore black, listened to heavy metal music, and had an interest in the occult. In a town already gripped by satanic panic, he became an easy target. His friend Jason Baldwin and Jesse Miskelly, who had an IQ of 72, were also implicated, despite the lack of forensic evidence tying them to the crime. The prosecution relied heavily on Miskelly's coerced confession, which was riddled with inaccuracies and contradictions. Nevertheless, the three teens were convicted. Eccles was sentenced to death, while Baldwin and Miskelly were given life sentences. The West Memphis 3 case highlighted the dangers of satanic panic in criminal justice, where fear and prejudice outweighed reason and evidence. In 2011, after nearly 2 decades in prison, the West Memphis 3 were released after entering Alford pleas, maintaining their innocence while acknowledging that the state had enough evidence to convict them. Though free, the case left a permanent scar on the justice system. During the height of satanic panic, even music came under fire, particularly rock and heavy metal. Bands like Led Zeppelin, Judas Priest, and Black Sabbath were accused of embedding satanic messages into their music through a technique known as backward masking. This fear was rooted in the belief that if you played certain records backward, hidden messages could be heard, supposedly influencing listeners to worship Satan or commit violent acts. Religious leaders and concerned parents rallied against these bands, destroying records and launching lawsuits. In one high-profile case, Judas Priest was even sued for allegedly causing a teenager's suicide through hidden messages in their music. Though the case was dismissed, it reflected the paranoia surrounding rock music during this time. Backward masking became the ultimate scapegoat for youth rebellion, with no credible evidence that it had any real influence, yet millions were convinced that rock music was leading their children astray. The rapid spread of satanic panic can be understood through the lens of psychology, specifically the concepts of groupthink and moral panic. Groupthink occurs when individuals suppress dissenting viewpoints to maintain harmony within a group, leading to poor decision-making. In the case of satanic panic, this meant that once an idea, no matter how far-fetched, was accepted by a community, it became almost impossible to question it without being ostracized. Moral panic, on the other hand, is the process by which a society overreacts to a perceived threat to its values or safety. During the Satanic Panic, these perceived threats were ritualistic abuse, occult practices, and demonic influence. As with earlier witch hunts, fear was amplified by rumor and misinformation, and those who were different became the targets of the community's wrath. The psychology of fear and the power of suggestion played a significant role in allowing satanic panic to take root and spread, leading to devastating consequences for those who were falsely accused. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, the tabletop role-playing game Dungeons & Dragons, D&D, rapidly grew in popularity, but as it did, it also came under intense scrutiny during the Satanic Panic. Critics, often from religious groups, argued that the game promoted satanic rituals, witchcraft, and dangerous role-playing. Central to their fears were the game's inclusion of magic, demons, and mythical creatures. This panic intensified with the highly publicized case of James Dallas Egbert III, a troubled teenager who ran away from home in 1979. His disappearance was incorrectly linked to his participation in Dungeons & Dragons, with the media and public led to believe that the game had somehow driven him to enter a labyrinth of underground tunnels beneath Michigan State University, where he was later found. Although the connection between Egbert's disappearance and Dungeons & Dragons was proven false, the damage was done. Despite being a creative outlet for players, the game became a scapegoat for broader societal fears about the occult. During the 1980s, toys were not immune to the wave of paranoia sweeping through the country, and one particular toy line that came under fire was the Masters of the Universe. Featuring characters like He-Man and Skeletor, the franchise was immensely popular with children. However, religious groups and Christian programming began targeting these toys as part of the so-called Satan's Toy Box. In Satan's Toy Box programming, shows labeled certain toys as tools of satanic indoctrination. Skeletor, the skeletal villain, was often pointed to as a clear symbol of evil, while the shows and toys' themes of magic, power, and fantastical realms were seen as encouraging occult practices. These accusations reflected deeper concerns about changing cultural norms and children being exposed to media and fantasy worlds that parents didn't understand. The attacks on toys like Masters of the Universe were less about their actual content and more about the fear that society was losing control over traditional values. The Satanic Panic left a lasting impact on American culture and the justice system. Innocent people were convicted of crimes they didn't commit, children's toys and games became objects of fear, and entire communities were gripped by paranoia. In many ways, Satanic Panic was a modern witch hunt, fueled by fear, misinformation, and the desire to protect traditional values in an increasingly complex world. As we look back, it's important to remember the lessons of Satanic Panic. When we allow fear to override reason, and when we scapegoat those who are different, we risk repeating the mistakes of the past. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed today's episode, subscribe, hit that like button, and let us know what you think in the comments below. As always, we leave you with this reminder that once you enter the dark, you may never be the same.